The broadcast is now starting. All attendees are in listen-only mode.
Hello, everyone. Good morning, good afternoon, or good evening, depending where you are in the globe. And thank you for joining me today. We will be exploring during this webinar, during the next 30 minutes, how to budget and expense cost, how to do budget and expense cost planning in Microsoft Project. I am Rafael Santos, so my name is Rafael Santos. I am a principal consultant here at Tensei Project Solutions, and I will be your host for today's webinar. So just wanted to say a big thank you for all of you who were able to join and dedicate a little bit of your time to watch this session and learn a little bit more on how to use Microsoft Project for cost, budget, and expense proposals. So before we get started, I just wanted to do a quick presentation, a brief introduction about myself. As I said, my name is Rafael Santos, and I work here at Tensei as a member of the delivery team. So I am a principal consultant and a member of the delivery team. I am basically engaging, or I do engage with clients and customers when they are deploying their PPM solutions. It can be project online, it can be project server. So my job here, my role at Sensei is to understand their needs, their requirements, and then convert all of those needs and requirements into solutions, into configuration, so they can use their PPM platform in a better way to move up their projects. I have been participating in projects to adopt and implement the PPM platform in basically three different continents. So previous experience in South America and in Africa, now working in North America. And I am based in São Paulo, Brazil. So I'm talking to you straight here from São Paulo. My email address, if you wanted to, get in touch or to discuss a little bit further any questions or anything that you might have, is rafael.santos at senseiprojectsolutions.com. So please feel free to reach me out if you need any help, if you need any further assistance. I should also mention that I am a Microsoft Project MVP. So Microsoft does have the MVP program, and we are only 35 MVPs in the entire world for Microsoft project. I am one of them. I'm running now my third turn as a Microsoft project MVP, so very proud of being member of this team. We do have another MVP at Sensei's team, which is Dale Howard. You may know him. So we are two MVPs for Sensei Project Solutions. And also, if you do have any questions during the presentation, please feel free to just try them out and paste them in the chat window. I'll be trying to answer then by the end of the presentation as much as I can. I wanted to do a quick introduction about Sensei Project Solutions as well. Sensei Project Solutions is a Microsoft PPM Partner of the Year or was a Partner of the Year in the year 2014. We have also been nominated as finalists in both 2015, 2017, and also 2018. So we help organizations achieve strategic goals through work and project management, best practices with Microsoft technology. So we are really experienced, a really experienced company which has trained more than 5,000 users and which has deployed more than 500 PPM. We have conducted more than 500 PPM implementations all over the world, and we truly have a global impact. So if you are looking for a help in your organization regarding the PPM solution, please just feel free to reach out to us and we can definitely provide some help, understand your needs. So let's move on and discuss what's going to be discussed during this webinar. So today we will be talking about cost planning overview. So we'll be seeing how we do cost planning overview using Microsoft Project. And here we are going to be using the standalone version of Microsoft Project. So we will not be talking on doing all of this in the PPM platform, but of course you can do this in the PPM platform as well and enhance the way your organization tracks and plan cost. We will be seeing the creation of working resources, the creation of budget and expense cost resources, also material resources when we need to use them. We'll be seeing how we assign budget costs to a project, as well as how we assign work expense and material costs or resources to detailed tasks in order to do the planning and tracking in terms of costs. So before we move on to do some hands-on stuff, I believe we have to do some concepts. We have to do some initial concepts in here. And it all starts when we are doing budgeting. So why we do budgeting, or why should we be doing budgeting in Microsoft Project? And how does the software work? I believe those are two important questions to be asked, and we need to provide some answers for them as well. So when we do budgeting, we are basically capturing the approved funding that we do have for our project. So sometimes we need to capture the information that has been shared with us in terms of how the budgeting has been defined, or how the budgeting has been approved. So what was the funding for the particular project we are working on? So when we do have this information, we can capture this in project using project desktop, and then we can schedule the planned spending throughout the project before we set the baseline. So we have all of the information regarding what has been given to us in terms of budgeting, what we are planning to use throughout the project, and with this information we can set up a baseline and get started moving on in terms of tracking the project. So then the next step will be to track the actual costs when the project is in execution. And for that, we can use work resources, we can use expense cost resources, and we can also use material resources. So at the end of the day, we will be able to have three dimensions of information in terms of cost: what has been given to us in terms of budgeting, what we have planned for this particular project, as well as what are we doing with the cost, or how we are spending the cost. So then we can easily identify variances from the baseline and take decisions to correct the project if it's needed, to ask for more funding if it's needed. So we will have the entire overview of how we have planned and how we are spending the costs into our project. So moving a little bit further here in terms of budgeting and cost planning, and what are the concepts that we have, it's important for us to know that Microsoft supports basically project level budgets. So the way it works is we can create budget cost resources within the software, and then we can use a single amount to distribute all of our budget information throughout the project. So we can have, for example, one single resource in which we are going to be basically collecting the budgeting that has been given to us, the funding that has been given to us, or we can break this down into subcategories. So then we can have things such as software budget, hardware budget, training budget, and then we can understand what was the amount of funding that has been granted to us based on the category that we are specifying throughout our project. Here in this example, in this webinar, I will be basically walking you through how to do this by organizing or by dividing the costs by subcategories such as software, hardware, and training. After we do the first budgeting portion of the thing, we can then move on and we can get started assigning resources to tasks in order to understand what their cost is going to be. So we can enable work resources to track labor costs, and we can also enable expense cost resources and or material resources in order to track non-labor costs. So if we have costs in our project that are not related to, for example, labor, so if we are doing training and we need to buy licensing, or we need to rent a facility, for example, to give a training, or if we are traveling and we have to pay airfare or accommodations or transportation, we can have we can track this through the use of expense cost resources or material resources, depending on what we are going to track and how we are going to track. So in order to do this, we have a couple of steps, and I wanted to share some of those steps with you before we go into a live demonstration. So the first thing is, if you are a project manager using Microsoft Project standalone, you have to perform a couple of activities. So first, you need to create your work resources that can be either human or generic, and you have to specify a standard rate for them. So each resource should have his or her own standard rate. So you can have, for example, Raphael, or you can have a generic resource such as a DBA or a project manager or something like that. After that, you can create your budget cost resources. So then it's going to be enabling you to plan your budgeting. And as I said, you can have a single resource for budget proposals, or you can decide to go ahead and have multiple budgeting resources organized by their categories, their subcategories. Then we can create at least one expense resource. But if we are breaking down our budgeting into categories, I would then recommend breaking down the expense cost resources into subcategories as well. So then you can match, what has been my, for example, hardware budget and what has been my expense budget, for example. If needed, you can also create material resources to assign tasks to material resources where you have to do a purchase, for example, for something that's a material, that's not a cost. And after that, one good thing to do is you can create a custom field within your project desktop called cost type. So this cost type field has to be based on a lookup table, and this lookup table should have the list of all cost types that the organization wants to track. So by this way, you can create, for example, hardware resources, you can create software resources, you can create training resources, and you can classify them using the cost type custom field. So in that way, you will have the ability to, at the end of the project or in the middle of the project, understand what has been the amount of money that we are putting or that we are spending with labor resources or with hardware resources or with training resources, and so on and so forth. Just a point that I wanted to make here is, if you are using Project Online or Project Server or a PPM tool, such as one of those two that I mentioned, then it's going to be something that your organization has to do behind the scenes. So you have to ask your PWA administrator or your PWA PMO team. Maybe a PMO team has the ability or and the permissions to do that. So then they can create all of these, all of the resources, all of the cost type and everything behind the scenes, and you just use at the end of the day the information that has been provided to you by your organization. So here the example we are going to take is basically using Project Desktop, but if you are playing with Project Online or Project Server, you may ask your PPM administrator so then they can take care of this for you and create all of this. So after we create all of our resources, what we have to do is we have to assign budget costs to a project, and this is done by assigning the budget cost resources to the project summary task. So I will tell you and I will show you how to do this. And then after you assign a budget cost resource to the project summary task, you can also specify what's the amount of budget cost to be used by that particular resource. So for example, here I was just providing or using an example of using $15,000 for training budget resource in a particular project. After we finish the assignment of budget resources, budget cost resources to this project summary task, we can just get started assigning the resources to the tasks in our schedule. So then we can assign work resources to every single detailed task. We can also assign expense cost resources or material resources to detailed tasks where the organization needs to track non-labor costs. And then we can specify cost values for expense costs when they are assigned to tasks. I will show you how to do that. After that, if we are using material resources, we can also assign material resources and determine what's the units or what's the number of units that we will be using for each material resource that we might have in our schedule. So after we do all of this, so we have our budgeting in place, we have assigned people to the tasks into our schedule. After we are done and our planning phase, I would say, is finished, all we have to do is to set up a baseline, so then we can get started tracking the variances, and we can get started understanding what's the amount of work that has been, what's the amount of cost that has been planned and budgeted, and what's the amount of cost that's being tracked, the actuals, the variances, and everything that we can compare against our baseline. So here at this point, I will just, pause a little bit and say now it's time for us to move on and do a hands-on. So for all of the um, steps that I previously shared with you, we'll be now moving on to Microsoft Project Desktop, and in there I will be showing you how we can set this up entirely in a project schedule from scratch. One point which is important here is this presentation, so the PPT slide deck with all of the steps that have been shared is going to be available for you guys. So if you want to receive a copy of the PPT slide deck, please just send me an email after the end of the presentation, and I will be more than happy to be sharing the PPT slide deck with you. So with that said, let's move on to Project Desktop. So I'll move on here to Project Desktop. And this is a single project that I have created. It's not like a real project that we could be using for tracking a project server installation and implementation, but this is just something I use for webinars and training, and this is something I have set up for us to use here during our walkthrough. So as you can see, we have a project that's called Project Server Installation. We have lots of tasks here, so I have the project kickoff, and then I have all of the main work packages that will be deploying and delivering through this project. So I have a first package here, which is the prepare for deployment, and when I expand it, I will see everything that's included in this work package. The same thing will happen when we go to configure database. So I have all of the tasks in here, and if I expand all of them, you are going to be seeing all of the things that have been included in my project. So it's a 43 row, the project has 43 tasks, I would say, in which we have all of this work being conducted and being done. All right, with that said, so let me go back here to level 1. So with that said, I have also created a couple of resources here in my schedule. So I will go back here to the Gantt chart and I will click on views. And then we have the task sheet view. In here, oh, sorry, not task sheet, sorry. It should be resource sheet. So in the resource sheet view, I have all of my resources. So all of the resources I am planning to use in my project. So I have, SharePoint Architect. I am just giving names here as roles, not individual persons. So I have, my SharePoint Architect. I have my Project Server Architect. I have a DBA. I have a Project Manager. And I have some resources that I created which are cost resources. So for my work resources, which are my labor resources, I have my project manager, my DBA, my project server architect, as well as my SharePoint architect. And for each one of them, I have a standard rate that will basically represent what's the value, or what's their standard rate when they are assigned to tasks on my project. So the SharePoint architect has a value, as well as the DBA, the project manager, and the project server architect. However, for all of the resources that I have, which are cost, there are no cost, there are no, I would say, standard rate, because we do not know what's the value that we are going to be using, or what's the amount of cost that's going to be required. So as soon as we are assigning people to assigning cost resources to tasks, we will be basically informing project on Microsoft project what's the cost that the utilization of this particular resource will generate. And as you can see, I am calling them with like generic names here. So I have my hardware budget, I have my labor budget, I have my software budget, as well as my training budget. And I have a hardware expense, a software expense, and a training expense. That's going to be basically representing all of the budgets that I have. I do not have like a labor expense, because the labor expense is going to be represented by the individual people, or the generic roles that I have here um, on my resource sheet page, or my resource sheet view. So then the next step will be, I have to identify which are the budget resources in my project, and I have to just tell Microsoft Project that they are in fact budget resources. So what I can do is, if I double click in the hardware budget resource, I can just check this as a budget resource. Same thing can be done for labor. Same thing can be done for software. And same thing can be done for training. So all of those items in here, they are budget resources. So then they have been defined, or they have to have this special check here. So then Microsoft Project knows that they are going to be considered budget resources within my schedule. Next thing is, if we want to classify and then understand what's the amount of work that we are, what's the amount of, sorry, non-work cost that we are spending, that we are planning based on categories, what we can do is we can go here to the project area, and then we can create a custom field that's going to be a resource custom field, and I will call this cost type, for example. So the name of my new custom field is going to be cost type, and it's going to be basically coming from a lookup table. So I will have a lookup with values in here, and I will call then labor. So the values that are going to be available are labor, hardware, software, and training, for example, which are basically matching what I do have here for both budget resources and expense resources. So when I do this, I can close out this table. So I have my cost type resource, my cost type custom field, which is coming from a lookup table. And what I can do is I can add a new column here and say, please show me the cost type. And I can classify my resources based on the cost type they are. So for example, my SharePoint architect is going to be a labor. So the classification for this particular one is going to be labor. Same thing happens for my project server architect. Same thing happens for my DBA. Same thing happens for my project manager. However, when I go to my hardware budget, it's a budget cost resource, and it should be then classified as hardware. Then I have labor budget, that's going to be classified as labor. So it's just a classification, so we can group, we can filter, we can basically understand how we are spending and how we are planning based on a category, on a specific category or type of cost that we are defining for each of the resources we have. So here I have software, here I have training, and then it's basically going to be just the same: hardware, software, and then training. So after the classification is all done, I can get started assigning resources to my tasks. So first thing I'm going to be doing is I have to define what's going to be um, the amount of cost that has been given to me in terms of funding. So it's going to be the budget cost that I have for each of the resources I have. And this cannot be done here through the Gantt chart. So if you go here to assign, we can basically assign resources, but we are not going to be able to define what's the budget cost. So I do prefer to change the view when I am assigning budget cost resources, and there is a view called task usage. So I like going to the task usage. So then I can say, all right, I have here on my project installation, which is my project summary task, I will assign the hardware budget, I will assign the labor budget, and I will assign the training budget. Okay, so hardware budget, training budget. Oh, I am missing software budget. Okay, so once we assign them, we have all of the resources in here. So for the project server installation, I have my hardware budget, my labor budget, training budget, and software budget. And what I can do is I can include a new column. Of course that I could be creating a view, but I'm just using Microsoft Project out of the box. So I can include a column that's called budget research, budget cost, and then I can determine what's going to be the amount of hardware budget that I have for this particular project. So let's say that in terms of hardware budget, I was granted with 15,000. So my hardware budget here is going to be 15,000. Same thing for labor. So for example, let's say for labor, we have 55,000. Then we have training, which is going to be 17,000. And then we have software, which is going to be 5,000, for example. So we have all of this. And if I was wishing to see how the budget cost is being distributed over the project, I can just insert here a new field, which is the budget cost. So as soon as I ask Microsoft Project to display my budget cost, I will be seeing how the budget cost is being distributed over time based on my project duration, for example. Okay, so after I have all of this in place, what I can get started doing is I can get started assigning people to tasks and assigning cost resources to tasks as well. So then I can just plan what's going to be the cost for my project. So if I go back to my Gantt chart view, I will be able to just expand this a little bit. So I will see all of my tasks. And what I can do is I am going to go here to details. And then I can say, all right, so create users in active in groups in Active Directory is going to be something that the SharePoint administrator is going to do. So I have my SharePoint architect, create resource, create groups in ID. It's a milestone, so I do not have to have a person assigned in this. So configure SQL network. I'm going to give this to the DBA. Then configure analysis services, I'm going to give this to the DBA. And that's basically the way we usually do, right? So we get started assigning people to tasks. And in here, as you can see, we have a task that's called acquire SharePoint and project server licenses. So let's say that this is going to cost me some software. So I have a software expense here, which is the acquisition of the SharePoint licenses, and I can just use the software expense resource that I have, and I can also say this is going to be assigned to my SharePoint architect, for example. So as soon as I do that, I can click OK, and I can just change the view here. So then my task form, which is now being displaying work information, I can change this to cost information, and I can say the software expense that's planned for us in terms of the software expense or acquiring the SharePoint and project server licenses is going to be $4,500, for example. So that's the way we are assigning, or we should be assigning costs, expense costs, I would say, to tasks. So then we see everything that's happening, and we can get started tracking what's being planned, and we can also compare this against what has been funding, what was our funding, initial funding. So I can, say prepare farm server, which is going to be for the SharePoint architect, and we can get started assigning all of people and items in here. Same thing, for example, let me scroll down to the bottom of the page. So for example, in here, we have a task which is conduct project server admin training, for example. So what I can do is I can go ahead here and say this is going to be conducted by my project server architect, and I will also have my training expense in here, and I'm planning to spend $7,000, for example, in this particular task for training expense. So this might include, renting a facility or a room, paying for the coffee break, and things such as this. As soon as we have done all of this, we will always have the opportunity to go back to our research sheet, and then I'm always going back to task sheet. I'm sorry. So I can go back to my research sheet, and if it's needed, I can put some cost in here. I can put some budget cost in here. And if we are grouping information by, for example, the cost type, I would be able to filter, for example, what's the hardware or what's the software expected. So I can see, my budget cost has been $5,000, and I am planning to spend 4,500 with this software expense in here. If I'm looking for labor, for example, I can filter by labor, and I can see, the amount of things. If I want to group things, I can filter, I can group. So that's basically the way we can set this up and define how our organization is going to be planning the costs throughout the project lifecycle, as well as tracking costs. So the key points are create your budget resources. Best practice is create a cost type column in your project professional. If you are using Project Online, then you already have this. You have only to configure this information. So create your cost type, so then you can organize, you can categorize, you can apply a segment or a classification for each resource into your schedule. Then go here and assign your budget resources to the project summary task, and it's better for you to do this through a view, for example, the task usage view. It's a better way, so then you can assign and you can define what's going to be the budget cost that has been granted to you. And after that, you just assign people to your tasks, to detailed tasks. You can also assign your expense cost resources, and if you do have material resources, you can also assign material resources to the detailed tasks. So then you are going to get started planning and seeing everything within the context of your project. Once you are ready, once you are done, do not forget to set a baseline for your project, so then you can have all of the information in terms of the planning, and you can get started tracking the planning costs against what you are doing, against the actuals, and you can get started seeing the variances when this is done. So this is all I have for today, everybody. Let me see here if I do have questions, if there are anything that you have asked that we need to answer. Okay, yeah, so for the people who are asking if the presentation is going to be recorded, yes, definitely the presentation is going to be recorded. It's being recorded, so it's going to be available just in a few days, I believe, after the presentation is finished. So we just need to process and upload the recorded version of the presentation, but it's going to be available definitely. So you can use the same link you used to enroll yourself to access the recorded version of this presentation. And again, if you wanted to get in touch, if you want to get a copy of this PPT slide deck, please do not hesitate to send me an email at rafael.santos@senseiprojectsolutions.com. I will be more than happy to be sharing with you more detailed information and to discuss with you anything that you might have to discuss. So everyone, I would say thank you very much for dedicating a little bit of your time to join me here today in this webinar session. And stay tuned because we have a monthly session happening until the end of this year. So just go to senseiprojectsolutions.com/webinars and you will be able to see all of the upcoming sessions. You will also be able to enroll yourself to attend more sessions in the future. So thank you very much. I hope that this presentation was helpful and I will be talking to you soon. Bye bye.